Hello, good evening, and welcome to our information session. My name is Liz Harrison. I am the elections coordinator. Also in the room today is we have Teresa Olson, who is the county clerk. On the call today, we have Jennifer and Carol from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So without further introductions, we'll take it away. I'm just going to share my screen here.
All right, so my name is Carol Sauve, attending along with me. We're from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and with me is Jennifer Casteria. So we would like to thank the County of Norfolk for inviting us and for hosting this candidate and third-party advertiser information session. Next slide, please. So our disclaimer, we'll start with that. These slides are meant to be a summary of some of the sections, and they should not be relied on for legal or official purposes. I do want to stress that we're not lawyers and that you should always consult the legislation and seek legal advice when necessary. We will not be able to cover every aspect of the municipal election, but we hope this will provide you with a better understanding of the process and the legislation and improve your comfort level. Congratulations for taking an interest in your community and in local government, whether you're interested in serving on a municipal council or on a school board or registering as a third-party advertiser. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines some of the topics we want to cover during this session. The roles of elected members of council, head of council, and municipal staff, as well as the role of the school board trustee. The nomination process and how a candidate withdraws a nomination. Also, what happens if a candidate files a nomination and then changes his or her mind about which office they wish to run for. We're going to give you some key dates, who's eligible to run for municipal office and school boards and who isn't. We're also going to look at general campaign rules and election finances. So campaign spending limits, contribution limits, campaign expenses, borrowing, what expenses are exempt from the spending limit, finance surplus and deficit, financial reporting at the end of the campaign period. We're going to be looking at compliance audits initiated by an application, at penalties, general information about the voters list, rights of scrutineers at the poll, recounts, and resources. So this is where you can find the information. We're going to detail that on the second to last slide. Next slide, please. So you're considering running for a municipal office. Local government is the level of government that is closest to the people and is the most accessible and responsive to the needs of the community. You've made a decision to throw your hat in the ring, or you're thinking about it and you're curious to know how to go about it. Perhaps it's something you've always wanted to pursue, or you want to make a difference, or you're not happy with some of the decisions that have been made, or you simply have a passion for politics. Regardless, it's a 4-year commitment that will be filled with challenges, excitement, disappointments, hard work, and a great deal of satisfaction. Ontario municipal governments deliver local services, while the province establishes the legislative and policy framework. So the Ontario government sets the standards for many local services, such as land use planning, building regulation, and social housing. And the province provides the funding to municipalities for delivery of some services. The ministry also works in partnership with the municipal sector to support efficient and responsive local governments that are sustainable and investment ready. Local government is a challenging environment with high expectations and limited resources. You'll be doing more with less. There is a limited understanding of roles of council and staff. Government is not like other businesses. You can't make everyone happy, so council must make difficult decisions in the best interest of the municipality. So before we get into an overview of the Municipal Elections Act, we wanted to provide a brief summary of the role of elected municipal officials and the role of staff. So please note that the information about the role of council and staff as well as accountability and transparency. This can all be found in the Counselor's Guide on the Ministry's website. This guide is an excellent tool that can provide you with a lot more information about how municipalities operate and how council and staff can work together in the best interest of the municipality. Next slide, please. So council and staff roles. Section 2 of the Municipal Act stipulates that municipalities are created by the province to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters within their jurisdiction. And each municipality is given powers and duties under the Municipal Act and other pieces of legislation for the purpose of providing good government. The Municipal Act is a legislative framework for municipalities, which seeks to balance local autonomy and flexibility with accountability and transparency of municipal operations. So the key to any organization, government, business, industry, or local service club is for everyone to understand their respective roles and relationships. In the next few slides, we're going to review the role of the mayor's role as the chief executive officer, the role of council, and the role of municipal staff, which are all key to an effective and efficient local government. Next slide, please. So the role of council. Section 224 of the Municipal Act states that it is the role of council to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality, to develop and evaluate the policies and programs of the municipality, determine which services the municipality provides, ensure that administrative and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of council, ensure that administrative and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of council. Sorry, I think I just repeated that. My apologies. Ensure the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, including the activities of the senior management of the municipality. They also must maintain the financial integrity of the municipality and carry out duties of council under the Municipal Act or any other act. Next slide, please. So it's also the role of council to conduct meetings and pass bylaws. They also develop policies with respect to accountability and transparency, notice to public, delegation of authority, hiring, disposition, and sale of land, procurement of goods and services, relationship between council and staff, protection of tree canopy and natural vegetation, pregnancy and parental leaves, among others. So this is done as a collective group with all the members each having one vote. Municipalities are created to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters within their jurisdiction, and each municipality is given powers and duties under the Municipal Act and many other acts for the purposes of providing good government with respect to those matters. Next slide, please. So the role of head of council. It's the role of head of council to act as the chief executive officer and to preside over council meetings so that its business can be carried out efficiently and effectively. The chief executive officer provides leadership to the council. It provides also information, recommendations to council on policies, practices, procedures in order to ensure transparency and accountability. And the chief executive officer also represents the municipalities at official functions. So they also carry out the duties of the head of council under the Municipal Act or any other act. Basically, the role of the head of council is to act as a leader. The head of council is also the chair of the meetings of council and the public face of the municipality. Next slide, please. All right, so the role of head of council. So as the chief executive officer of the municipality, the head of council shall uphold and promote the purposes of the municipality, promote public involvement, act as a representative and promote the municipality locally and elsewhere, participate in and foster activities that enhance the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the municipalities and its residents. So although the legislation refers to the head of council as the chief executive officer of the municipality. This may be confusing to people with a business background. The head of council actually has very few powers that can be exercised independently of the rest of council. So except where specifically delegated in cases of emergency or in the context of procedural matters during a council meeting, the head of council has no greater power than any other individual member of council. It's important to note the council makes decisions, not any individual council member, including the head of council. So to clarify, the head of council always has a vote. There's sometimes confusion on this point in the media and with the public who think that the head of council can only vote in the case of a tie. Another clarification regarding voting: refraining from voting counts as a no. So this is spelled out specifically in as a no vote. It's spelled out specifically in legislation in the case of recorded votes. A tie loses, so the result is the same as having voted no. I'm going to hand over the next few slides to my colleague Jen.
Okay, next slide, please. We're going to talk about the staff role. So the role of staff is set out in Section 227 of the Municipal Act. This would include implementing council's decisions and establish administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions, undertake research and provide advice to council on policies and programs of the municipality, and carry out duties required by legislation or other duties assigned by the municipality. A key feature of effective and efficient councils is a well-developed understanding of the council-staff relations and the role of each party. The Councillor's Guide provides a list of ways that council members can assist staff to meet council's expectations. Some examples include having a policy requiring comprehensive job descriptions for all staff, providing clear policy decisions, directions, and expectations, adopting policies that complement and reinforce staff efforts, consulting with staff before deciding on policies, being prepared for council meetings. Staff, in turn, should provide well-organized agendas with supporting materials, provide sufficient timely information and analysis to make council's decision-making easier, notify council of changes to legislation and programs, provide advice on policies, including options and recommended actions, identify the costs and benefits for the community in human and financial terms, notify council immediately of any unintended or unexpected impacts of policy decisions, implement council's decisions as effectively and professionally as possible. So as you know, there are some municipal staff positions that have statutory obligations, such as the clerk, treasurer, chief building official, and fire chief. It's important that council not interfere with the statutory obligations of these roles. For example, the clerk and treasurer positions have statutory duties or responsibilities assigned to them under the Municipal Act or other pieces of legislation. The building code would define statutory duties for the chief building official, and the Fire Prevention and Protection Act would define the statutory duties of the fire chief. Next slide, please. We'll talk about the role of the Chief Administrative Officer, or the CAO. So Section 229 of the Municipal Act stipulates that a municipality may appoint a Chief Administrative Officer who shall be responsible for A, the exercising general control and management of the affairs of the municipality for the purpose of ensuring the efficient and effective operation of the municipality, and B, performing such other duties that are assigned by the municipality. The function of the CAO within the municipality is akin to the role of a chief executive officer in a business environment. The CAO is responsible for the general control and management of the day-to-day operations of the municipality, which may include developing and implementing appropriate internal administrative practices and procedures to assure the efficient, effective, and accountable operation of the municipality. To help us understand the role of the CAO in the municipality, we can picture an hourglass. Council is at one end, and all municipal staff and department heads are at the other. The CAO is in the middle, or the smallest part where the sand and the hourglass flows through. So if council wants to give direction to a specific department, the communication would flow through the CAO. Likewise, if the department wants to give information, reports, etc. to council, it would flow through the CAO. Next slide, please. The council staff relationship and role. The Counselor's Guide provides some very useful information on how council and staff can work together. This slide provides you with a high-level overview of the relationship. So councils and their administration have different roles within the municipality, but their roles have common goals and purposes. In general, it is the role of the elected council to represent the community and set the direction and policy for the municipality, and it's the role of the staff to manage the people and resources to achieve council's vision. Council generally sets the policy direction for the municipality, and staff provides the research and expert advice to help council in its decision-making process. Once council makes a decision, staff generally has the responsibility to implement the policy of council, for example, through administering and delivering services and programs to the community. Staff and council rely on one another to move the municipality forward. Both staff and council provide leadership. Council provides political leadership, while the administration provides leadership to the organization. The relationship between staff and council is interconnected, and it is important for council members and staff to respect one another's roles so they can serve the public in an effective and efficient manner. Municipalities are required to adopt a policy on the relationship between members of council and municipal staff. Municipalities have the flexibility to determine the content of these policies. Next slide, please. The representative role. So the next few slides will provide a bit more information on each of the role of council as described in the Counselor's Guide. So the representative role. So in your role as a representative, you were elected by the constituents to represent their views when dealing with issues that come before council. However, your constituents may have many views and opinions, and you cannot represent all of them all of the time. For many issues, you will have to consider a variety of opposing interests and make decisions that will not be popular with everyone. You should use your judgment and decide based on the best interests of the municipality as a whole. In practice, there's no single correct approach to the representative role, and on many issues, you may find that you fall somewhere between the two opposing viewpoints. So be sure to familiarize yourself with any policies or protocols that your municipality may have in place regarding the handling of complaints and citizen inquiries. Although you may want to find some way of helping, remember to consult the municipal staff. If your municipality doesn't already have a complaint policy, council may wish to consider adopting one. Furthermore, there may be circumstances where decisions are made by designated staff that operate at arm's length from the municipality and where it could be inappropriate for elected officials to interfere or be seen to be interfering. Examples of this would include decisions made by the fire chief, the chief building official, or the medical officer of health. So a counselor who has made promises that cannot be kept may lose credibility with the citizens and strain the working relationships with the staff. As I mentioned before, each individual council member has one vote when making decisions. Every member of council should vote on matters in the best interest of the municipality as a whole, and every member should respect each other's point of view during and after debating an issue at the council table. Once a decision is made by council, it's the decision of the municipality, and staff are required to carry out and implement that decision. Next slide, please. So, policymaking role. So some council decisions are routine. Others establish general principles to help guide further actions. These are often considered policy decisions. Some policies can be specific, such as a bylaw requiring dogs to be kept on leashes in public areas, and others can be broader and more general, such as the approval of the official plan. So how is policy made? This slide outlines the general process undertaken during the policymaking role. So the Counselor's Guide does provide a lot of detail on the policymaking process, but we will kind of give you a little high-level overview. So you start by identifying the issue. So as council, you agree on what the issue is and what the objectives are. Council would then direct staff to research the issue further and identify and recommend options to council. There may be a need to consult with the public and consider their feedback. Council would then review the staff information and consider factors such as the demands on time to implement the policy and any cost implications, etc. Council would then make a decision on the best course of action and adopts the policy. From there, staff is directed to implement the policy. After the policy is implemented, Council would work with the staff to evaluate the policy and make any amendments that may be required. In practice, policy making is sometimes less orderly than it appears on the slide because of various factors. Oftentimes, there's a rapidly changing environment. The issues facing you could be complex, or it could be difficult to single out problems that require more immediate action or attention. There could be differing and sometimes strongly held views by the stakeholders and the members of the public. There could also be a lack of time to identify all the possible alternatives and to conduct detailed research and analysis. And there could be legal and financial implications limiting what council may do. The implementation of the policy, along with the establishment of monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, may be very complex. So to recap, council is the primary policy-making body of the municipality, while administrative staff is responsible for carrying out the council's policy decisions. The two roles are distinct, but there can be much overlap. Although staff is responsible for implementing a policy, council may wish to develop appropriate reporting mechanisms to help ensure that the policies are being carried out as intended and as effectively as possible so that council can follow the implementation progress. Next slide, please. We're now going to talk about the stewardship role. So council's objectives are to ensure that the municipality's financial and administrative resources are being used as efficiently as possible. There's a fine line between council's overall stewardship of the municipality and the administration's management of day-to-day activities. Generally, council monitors the implementation of its approved policies and programs, but the practical aspects of its implementation and administration are the staff's responsibility. Essentially, the day-to-day operations of the municipality are left up to the staff. To be effective in this stewardship role, council may wish to have processes in place to help ensure that policies adopted by council are being implemented, staff are administering services and programs as council intended, rules and regulations are being applied correctly and consistently, and funds are being spent only as authorized, and the municipality's resources, financial and otherwise, are being used appropriately and as efficiently as possible. Establishing and following such policies and guidelines helps council leave the day-to-day details for the staff to manage. Council is then freer to deal with exceptional situations, ensure that policies are current, and listen to issues raised by the public to represent the broader community interest. Before council can monitor and measure the municipality's administrative effectiveness and efficiency, it may wish to become familiar with policies currently in place. With input from municipal staff, council can determine whether the policies are functioning well or if changes are necessary. Next slide, please. So we get to accountability and transparency. So Ontario municipalities and members of council operate under a legislated accountability and transparency framework that include rules for the municipality and rules for members of council and local boards. Ensuring accountability and transparency is one of council's roles under Section 224 of the Municipal Act. It is a priority in maintaining public trust. Councillors are, of course, accountable to the public as elected officials. However, it is also important that procedures and policies are clearly set out and accessible, and that the day-to-day operations of the municipality are transparent. The slide outlines policies that council are required to adopt. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it over to, I'm going to continue on for one more slide. We're going to talk about code of conduct. So the code of conduct usually sets out expectations and standards for councillors' conduct. Codes may help prevent ethical conflicts and help in their resolution, serve as a basis for council orientation and training, and serve as a reference throughout the operation of the council's term. With the growing importance of accountability and integrity, more municipalities have adopted code of conducts for members of council and certain local boards. Some have also adopted other procedures, rules, and policies governing the ethical behavior of those members. Municipalities are required to establish code of conduct for members of council and certain local boards, which must include certain subject matters. These would include gifts, benefits, and hospitality, respectful conduct, including towards officers and employees of the municipality or of local boards, handling of confidential information, the use of municipal or local board property and equipment. Now I'm going to hand it over to Carol.
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
All right, so now we're going to talk about accountability officers. So municipalities are required to provide access to an integrity commissioner. An integrity commissioner operates independent of council and reports to council with respect to the application of a code of conduct of members of council and local boards. They also review the procedures, rules, policies governing the ethical behavior of members of council and local board. The Integrity Commissioner functions may also include providing advice and education about the code and other ethical rules to members of council and the public, as well as conducting inquiries into requests from council or a local board, a member of council or a board, or a member of the public about whether a member of council or local board has contravened the applicable code of conduct. So if the Integrity Commissioners report that in their opinion, a member of council has contravened the code of conduct, the municipality may impose a penalty in the form of a reprimand or a suspension of pay for a period of up to 90 days. It's up to the municipality to decide how to proceed once they receive that report. So to help ensure integrity and accountability in public office, the Municipal Act provides municipality with the authority to appoint certain integrity and accountability type officers. So these include a municipal ombudsman. So this officer's function is to investigate in an independent manner decisions and recommendations made and actions done or omitted in the course of the administration of a municipality, local boards, or certain municipal corporations, as the municipality specifies. So this is a separate office from the Ontario Ombudsman. We're talking about the Municipal Ombudsman. Ontario Ombudsman also has a role with respect to municipalities. We'll talk about that a little later. Another accountability officer is the Auditor General, who may assist council in holding itself and municipal administrators accountable for the quality of stewardship over public funds and achieving value for money in municipal operations. The Auditor General must also perform his or her duties in an independent manner. The Auditor General's responsibilities do not include the responsibilities of the municipal auditor. So municipalities also may wish, if they wish, appoint a lobbyist registry and registrar and registration system, such as establishing a code of conduct for lobbyists and providing former public office holders, prohibiting former public office holders from lobbying for a specified time period. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about the Ontario Ombudsman. So the Ontario Ombudsman has a role with respect to municipalities, and this role builds on the local accountability and transparency framework in the Municipal Act. This role is in addition to the Ontario Ombudsman's role as the default meeting investigator for municipalities that have not appointed a local meeting investigator. So the Ontario Ombudsman supports transparency in government and may recommend improvements. They may investigate municipalities when a complaint is received or on the Ombudsman's own initiative. Although the Ontario Ombudsman may investigate, they cannot compel municipalities to take action. The Ombudsman may make recommendations to council and the municipality as part of their report. It's up to the municipality whether and how to address any recommendations made by the Ombudsman. And it is up to the Ombudsman how to respond to complaints. So for example, the Ontario Ombudsman's practice is to investigate complaints made to local integrity officers only after the local complaint processes are completed. The Ontario Ombudsman does not replace locally established complaint mechanisms or act as an integrity commissioner for municipalities. Local integrity officers and municipal codes of conduct are an important part of Ontario's local accountability framework. And certain local boards, for example, police services boards and children's aid societies, may be exempted from the Ontario's Ombudsman's oversight. For more information, you should look up Ontario Regulation 114-15 under the Ombudsman Act. If you want more information on the Ontario Ombudsman, including its processes, please see the Ombudsman Act and the Ontario Ombudsman's website. Next slide, please. So privacy and confidentiality. Personal privacy and other confidentiality issues are an important practical and legal consideration for municipal councillors and staff. The Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act is the primary statute for privacy and confidentiality. It sets out rules for collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. According to these rules, councillors and staff, in most circumstances, protect personal privacy and only collect, use, and disclose personal information in accordance with those rules. So, for example, depending on circumstances, councillors and staff may or may not be authorized to obtain personal information in the course of their duties. This might mean that at times councillors could not obtain this kind of information from staff. Municipal freedom of information legislation also regulates confidential information of other kinds. So that's in addition to personal information. Other laws, including local bylaws, also regulate personal and other kinds of confidential information. Councillors who may have received personal and other confidential information in the course of their duties will have related responsibilities such as protecting and safeguarding the information. Councillors may wish to check with municipal staff about appropriate measures and the municipality's practices. So, for example, providing for the physical security to help prevent unauthorized disclosure or loss of confidential information. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at contributions. So contributions from the candidate and their spouse are considered to have come from the same person, and they count against the self-contribution limit. The rules for determining whether corporations are considered to be one contributor are clarified. So if one corporation controls the others directly or indirectly, then they are considered to be the same contributor. If the corporations are owned or controlled by the same person or group of persons, either directly or indirectly, they are considered to be the same contributor. Next slide, please. So candidates and third-party advertisers cannot accept contributions from a number of people. The federal political party, constituency, association, registered candidate in a federal election, a provincial political party, federal or provincial government, municipality, a school board, a business, or a group that is not a corporation. When we're talking about volunteers, the value of services provided by volunteers is generally not considered to be a contribution. So if a professional, like an accountant or a lawyer, volunteers to provide services for which they would normally be paid, the market value of the service must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer and is a campaign expense. As mentioned previously, only third-party advertisers can accept contributions from corporations and unions. Next slide, please. So campaign contributions are monies, goods, or services given to a candidate for his or her election campaign. Cash contributions may only be accepted up to $25. Contributions for more than $25 must be made by check, money order, or by a method that clearly shows where the funds came from. Fundraising functions are events or activities held by or on behalf of a candidate for the primary purpose of raising money for the candidate's campaign. So the price of admission to a fundraising function is a campaign contribution, and a receipt must be issued for the full amount. Receipts must be issued for every contribution and should contain the name and address of the contributor and the amount and date. Next slide, please. So contribution limits. The limit on contributions to any one candidate or registered third-party advertiser is $1,200, except for the City of Toronto mayoral candidates, in which case the amount is $2,500. The individual contribution amount has increased from $750 to $1,200, but the aggregate amount of $5,000 stays the same. Since candidates and third-party advertisers are required to inform contributors of contribution limits, you may want to include the limits on the receipt provided to the contributors. Next slide, please. Self-funding limits. So self-funding limits for municipal council candidates based on the number of electors voting for the office to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. So the formula for calculating the limit is $7,500 plus 20 cents per elector for head of council and $5,000 plus 20 cents per elector for other council offices. So the highest self-funding limit that anyone can possibly have is $25,000. If the formula works out to a number that's over $25,000, they still get the $25,000 limit. If the formula works out to less than $25,000, then they get whatever the formula works out to. I'm going to hand over to Jen the next couple of slides.
Okay, next slide, please. Borrowing. So while candidates can open their campaign account with their own funds, the candidate cannot loan funds to his or her campaign to kickstart it with the intention of getting it all back. The only way a candidate can reclaim this startup amount is after the election campaign period ends and prior to filing the financial statement, the candidate or his or her spouse may be refunded any contributions from surplus. You can't receive a loan from family members or from any corporate accounts that you may have access to. The loan isn't considered to be campaign income, and paying it back is not a campaign expense. But if you or your spouse guarantee the loan and the campaign does not repay all of it, the remaining balance is considered to be a contribution, since the guarantor is basically providing the campaign the means to repay the loan. Keep in mind the contribution limit for the candidate and spouse if borrowing. Any interest that the campaign pays on the loan is a campaign expense. Next slide, please. So campaign expenses. So what's considered a campaign expense would be the replacement value of goods retained by the person, individual, corporation, or trade union from any previous election in the municipality and used in the current election. The value of contributions of goods and services, audit and accounting fees, interest on loans under section 88.17, the cost of holding fundraising functions, the cost of holding parties and making other expressions of appreciation after the close of voting. For a candidate, expenses relating to a recount or a proceeding under section 83, expenses relating to a compliance audit, and expenses that are incurred by a candidate with a disability or a registered third party who is an individual with a disability that are directly related to the disability and would not have been incurred but for the election for which the expenses relate. The cost of election campaign advertisements with the meaning of within the meaning of the section 88.3 or third-party advertisements as the case may be. So for greater certainty, the cost of holding fundraising functions does not include costs related to events or activities that are organized for such purposes as promoting public awareness of a candidate and at which the soliciting of contributions is incidental, or the promotion of materials in which the soliciting of contributions is incidental. Next slide, please. Candidates and third-party advertisers should become familiar with campaign expense provisions. So campaign expenses are those costs incurred by the candidate or on the candidate's behalf during his or her campaign by a third-party advertiser during their campaign. The nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included on the financial disclosure form. Goods and services donated to the campaign are also expenses and must be reported. A receipt must be provided for fair market value. Only nominated persons and/or third-party advertisers can incur expenses during the campaign period. Payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account, and a receipt providing the details and proof of payment must be obtained. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser. With respect to campaign inventory, if you ran in the last election and want to use leftover goods such as signs or office supplies, you have to determine what the current value of those goods is and what it would cost you if you were to purchase them today. These amounts are recorded as an expense. Conversely, if you end up with leftover inventory at the end of this campaign and it becomes your property, but if you want to store them to use in another election, any costs for storage are not considered a campaign expense. Next slide, please. A spending limit. So the spending limit formula for candidates and the maximum amount for parties after voting day are set out in Ontario Regulation 101/97. The clerk calculates the spending limits twice. So the first time, upon the candidate filing the nomination form, the clerk shall calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors on the voters list as it existed on September 15th, 2018. The second calculation is based on the number of electors on the voters list as it exists on September 15th, 2022. And just note that that calculation must be provided to candidates on or before September 25th, 2022. Whichever number is higher is the spending limit, and the clerk's calculation is final. Next slide, please. So clerks will continue to provide estimates of the spending limits. Dates have been slightly amended with transition dates for the 2018 election. Candidates will be required to inform their contributors of the contribution limits. So that example is how much a contributor can contribute to an individual candidate's campaign and the aggregate limit on contributions to any one council or local board election. The spending limit is to be provided by September 25th. If a third-party advertiser has registered in more than one municipality, each registration is a separate campaign with its own spending limits. The campaign finance rules are generally the same for third-party advertisers as they are for candidates. So example given, they are subject to the same contribution limits and have the calculated spending limits. This includes financial filing requirements, requests for extensions, and records. Third-party advertisers are also required to ensure contributions and expenses are tracked and accounted for. Proper record retention, proper direction is provided to those incurring expenses or accepting contributions on their behalf, and that the spending limits are being adhered to. Next slide, please. Most expenses are subject to the spending limits. Those listed in this slide are not. So expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the campaign spending limit. But in order to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose. Campaign events at which incidental fundraising takes place do not qualify as fundraising functions. Similarly, if a brochure promoting awareness of a candidate that contains contact information to make a campaign contribution doesn't qualify as a fundraising function. Expenses that were subject to the spending limit if incurred before voting day are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. Next slide, please. A third-party advertiser spending limits. So they're subject to two spending limits, a general spending limit and a separate limit for expenses related to parties and expressions of appreciation after the close of voting. So Ontario Regulation 101/97 provides the following formula for calculating third-party spending limits. $5,000 plus 5 cents per elector to a maximum of 25,000. The formula used is based on the number of electors entitled to vote in an election in the municipality. The Municipal Elections Act also provides that the spending limits for parties and other expressions of appreciation after voting day be set at 10% of the general spending limit. This would be consistent with the spending limit in place for candidates. Next slide, please. A campaign finance rule. So as a candidate or a third-party advertiser, it is important that you be fully aware of the responsibilities regarding election spending and accepting campaign contributions. A question we're often asked each municipal election is whether there is a requirement for every candidate to have a chief financial officer. The answer is no. Suggest that you familiarize yourself with Section 88.8 to 88.21 of the Municipal Elections Act and also the financial statements that you will be required to file. This will help you in organizing your records and how they have to be reported. You are required under the Municipal Elections Act to keep accurate records and open a campaign bank account if you are spending any money or accepting any contributions. So please note that a bank account is not required if a candidate or third-party advertiser does not receive any money or spend any money. Next slide, please. So some more rules. Candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep are required to keep complete and accurate financial statements during the course of their campaigns. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the relevant prescribed financial form. All candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep all campaign financial records until after November 15th, 2026, when the new council takes office. These rules apply whether you're elected or not. Pass the hat donations are considered donations that are under $25 and may be given anonymously. You do not have to issue a receipt. This is campaign income that is not considered to be a contribution to the total amount received and must be reported as such on the campaign financial statement. Next slide, please. Store receipts in a secure place as they are valuable documents. Receipts must be signed by the candidate and or his or her designate. It is a good practice to have receipts that is a multi-part form, so one for the contributor and one or more for the candidate's records. Receipts should be sequentially numbered. Open a bank account which provides monthly statements and canceled checks. Produce duplicate deposit slips for every deposit, listing the names of all contributors and the amounts received from each. Maintain a petty cash fund to handle minor expenses and obtain invoices to support all payments from the fund. At any time, the cash on hand plus the total amount of invoices should equal the original amount of the petty cash fund. The fund can be replenished periodically by a check drawn on the campaign account in the amount equal to the total amount of the invoices. Candidates and third-party advertisers may find it useful to look over Form 4, candidates, and Form 8 for third-party advertisers, respectively, at the beginning of their campaign to give them an idea of what information will be needed to report on at the end of their campaigns. It is a requirement under the Municipal Elections Act to maintain records November 15th, 2023. Next slide, please. Campaign advertisements. So the period for third-party advertisements, as shown on the slide, is the period when the rules for third-party advertisers apply. So in 2022, that is was from May 1st, 2022 until the close of voting at 8 p.m. on October 24th, 2022. So please note that third-party advertisers and candidates are required to identify themselves on signs and advertisements. Municipal Election Act references for candidates in 88.3 and for third-party advertisers in section 88.4. Next slide, please. So the broadcaster or publisher of a third-party or candidate advertisement shall maintain records containing the following information for a period of 4 years after the date of the advertisement appears and shall permit the public to inspect the records during normal business hours. So it needs to contain the name of the candidate or the registered third-party advertiser, the name, business address, and telephone number of the individual who deals with the broadcaster or publisher under the direction of the candidate or third-party advertiser, a copy of the advertisement or the means of reproducing it for inspection, and a statement of the charge made for its appearance. So I'm going to pass it back over to Carol.
Thank you, Jen. So next slide, please. So now we're looking at financial statement. So Section 88, subsection 25 of the Municipal Elections Act discloses that all candidates are required to file Form 4 with the clerk, regardless of how much or how little they spent or fundraised. So if you file the nomination form, you must file a Form 4. This form is required even if you withdrew your nomination or you were acclaimed. And if you registered as a third-party advertiser, you must complete Form 8. A candidate may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up until the filing deadline. The clerk is required to make public a report of which candidates filed financial statements and which did not. Next slide, please. So all contributions must be reported. The names of the contributors who contribute more than $100 must be reported on the financial statement. The clerk is required to make financial statements available to the public in an electronic format free of charge. The appointment of an auditor by the candidate is mandatory if expenses or contributions exceed $10,000. Auditors must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act 2004. And note that campaign statements are public documents. Next slide, please. So candidates can file their financial documents at any time after voting day to January 3rd. So this has been adjusted for December 31st because it falls on a Saturday. Filing the financial statement ends the campaign period. This will make it easier for acclamations and campaigns where little or no expenses is incurred. Clerks will be required to report whether candidates have met their financial filing obligation and publish that report on the municipal website or in another electronic form. This needs to be done by April 30th in the case of regular elections or within 90 days of a by-election. Clerks can determine the conditions for the electronic filing of financial statements. Next slide, please. So the nomination fee is only refundable if the financial statement is filed on time. A candidate third-party advertiser who misses the filing deadline may file within 30-day grace period, provided a $500 late filing fee is paid to the municipality. So a candidate who chooses to file the 30-day grace period within the 30-day grace period will be subject to both the $500 late filing fee as well as the loss of their nomination refund. A candidate third-party advertiser may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error right up until the filing deadline. Next slide, please. So surplus. When filing the financial statement, a candidate or third-party advertiser with a campaign surplus must pay the entire amount to the clerk. So prior to paying over any surplus funds to the clerk, a candidate or a third-party advertiser is entitled to a refund of any contributions they or their spouse, if it's for an individual, made to the campaign, not to anyone else. The amount that may be refunded is the lesser of the amount of the relevant contribution or the amount of the surplus. So the clerk is required to place surplus monies in trust for use by both the candidate and if it's a third-party advertiser, if they need it for a compliance audit. If neither the candidate nor third-party advertiser requires the funds for these purposes, it becomes the property of the municipality or the school board. Next slide, please. So every council and school board must establish a compliance audit committee. Members of a compliance audit committee cannot be members of the council or the school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered third-party advertiser. The clerks are to review contributions and to prepare a report for consideration by the Compliance Audit Committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded any contribution limits. So this process is related to reviewing contributions as reported on the financial statements and is not connected to the compliance audit process. If it's apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee, which would meet to determine whether to proceed with legal action. The legislation does not specify what details are to be provided in the report to the committee. Electors entitled to vote in an election may apply for a compliance audit even if the candidate has not filed a financial statement. The application must be in writing and set out the electors' reasons for why they believe the Municipal Elections Act has been contravened. The application must be submitted to the municipal clerk or the secretary of the school board within 90 days of the filing deadline. The Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide to retain an auditor to undertake, decide whether or not to retain an auditor to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's financial return. Next slide, please. So the Compliance Audit Committee is required to provide brief written reasons for its decision. Compliance Audit Committee's meetings are required to be open to the public, but the committee may deliberate in private. Electors can apply for a compliance audit or a third-party advertiser's campaign finances. The minister has the authority to make a regulation setting out the qualifications for compliance audit committee members. Section 88, subsection 33.8 notes that the written reasons for the committee's decision shall be given to the candidate, the clerk with whom the candidate filed his or her nomination, the secretary of the local board, if it's applicable, and the applicant. And if an audit occurs, the report must be circulated to the same individuals. The Compliance Audit Committee considers the auditor's report. So if the Compliance Audit Committee determines that there's been an apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act, the committee will decide whether to proceed with legal action. Decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice. A person who believes that a candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action without having first obtained a compliance audit. Next slide, please. So offenses. Section 90.2 states that an offense described in subsection 3, we'll get to that, constitutes a corrupt practice, and a person who commits it on conviction is disqualified from voting at an election until the next regular election has taken place after the election to which the offense relates. That's in addition to being liable to any other penalty provided for in this act. So section 90.2 states that no person shall, directly or indirectly, A, offer, give, lend, or promise, or agree to give or lend any valuable consideration in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote. B, advance, pay, or cause to be paid money intending that it be used to commit an offense referred to in Clause A, or knowing that it will be used to repay money used in that way. C, give, procure, or promise or agree to procure an office or employment in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote. D, apply for, accept, or agree to accept any valuable consideration or office or employment in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote. And finally, E, give, procure, or promise or agree to procure an office or employment to induce a person to become a candidate, refrain from becoming a candidate, or withdraw his or her candidacy. So next section, please. Next slide. So you have here on the slide the various penalties for an individual, for a candidate, for a trade union or corporation. So just note that ineligibility to vote is a penalty if you're convicted of a corrupt practice. And this is under Municipal Election Act, Section 90. So I'm going to hand over to Jen the next slides.
Okay, next slide, please. So the voters list. So the preliminary list of electors as corrected by the clerk becomes the voters list on September 1st, 2022. The clerk determines how and when individuals can apply to have their name and information corrected or added to or removed from the voters list. The clerk can also remove a name from the list if the clerk becomes aware that the person has died. The clerk shall not provide a copy of the voters list or a part of the voters list until September 1st. Next slide, please. One copy of the voters list can be provided to each municipal candidate or trustee candidate. The request must be made to the clerk in writing. Candidates running an award are entitled only to that portion of the list that contains the names of the electors entitled to vote for that office. Copies of the voters list are not available before September 1st, 2022. The voters list shall not be posted in a public place. The voters list shall not be made available to the public by posting on an internet website or via any other print or electronic medium of mass communication. Third-party advertisers are not eligible to receive a copy of the voters list. Candidates running an award are entitled only to that portion of the list that contains the names of the electors entitled to vote for that office. Next slide, please. The clerk may require anyone who receives a copy of the list to sign a receipt acknowledging the list is only to be used for election purposes and any other use would be in violation of the Municipal Elections Act. An elector's name shall appear only once on the list. In a ward system, an elector is entitled to vote only in the ward that he or she resides. Next slide, please. Proxy voting. There are a number of reasons why someone would appoint someone else to vote on their behalf, including absence from the area or illness, etc. Section 44 of the Municipal Elections Act concerns the issuance of proxy forms. No appointments until all nominations are closed. Clerk may designate a place and time for presentation of proxy voting application and appointment forms for clerk's clarification. On the day or days of advanced vote, the clerk's office or another location may be designated and open from noon to 5 p.m. as per section 44, subsection 6. Assignment of proxy vote is the responsibility of an eligible voter to appoint an identified eligible voter. What's considered eligible proxy may exercise only one proxy vote unless the proxy is acting on behalf of a spouse, sibling, parent, child, grandparent, or grandchild. So please note that proxy forms must have original signatures. And another note is to please check with your municipal clerk if voting proxy is available, as some municipalities use alternative voting and may not permit proxy voting. Next slide, please. So scrutineers. So only a candidate may appoint scrutineers to represent him or her during the voting and the counting of votes, including during a recount. Third-party advertisers cannot appoint scrutineers. In the traditional election where voting takes place at a poll, the DRO is in charge of the activity of the voting place, and the DRO may ask the scrutineer to leave if the scrutineer is not complying with the legislation. Candidate scrutineers should respect that the DRO must ensure fairness, access, privacy, and security of the vote. So a useful tip, check with the clerk to see if the list of scrutineers' rights is being given to the election staff at the poll. If so, use that list to prepare your own and hand out to each of your scrutineers a list of their rights, which are spelled out in Section 47, Section 5 of the Municipal Elections Act. And just by the way, the DRO is the Deputy Returning Officer. Next slide, please. Recounts. A recount is automatic if the vote is tied. Council and school boards have the option of establishing policies prior to the election that also allows for an automatic recount. Council still retains the option to pass a resolution for a recount within 30 days after the clerk has declared the results of the election. An eligible elector can apply to the courts for a recount within 30 days of the clerk's declaration of the results. Next slide, please. So some key dates. So voting day is Monday, October 24th, 2022, between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m., unless reduced hours are set out in a bylaw for retirement homes or institutions, or council has passed a bylaw to open voting earlier than 10 a.m., as per the Municipal Elections Act. The campaign period, the time when a candidate can accept contributions and incur election expenses, runs from the date the nomination is submitted up until January 3rd, 2023. The campaign period, which is the time the third-party advertiser can incur expenses, begins on the date their registration is certified, being the earliest date would be May 1st, 2022, and runs until January 3rd, 2023. The deadline for the filing of the campaign financial statement in the clerk's office is Friday, March 31st, 2023, no later than 2 p.m. All candidates and third-party advertisers must file this statement regardless of how much they spent or received in contributions. Next slide, please. So resources. So here's some resources. The first link will take you to eLaw's website, where all provincial legislation is available online, including the associated regulations. You will want to be familiar with the Municipal Elections Act of 1996, the Municipal Elections Act of 2001, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and, if running for a school board, the Education Act. The second link is to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing website. This is a site that you will be able to access the 2022 Voters Guide, the 2022 Candidates Guide, and the 2022 Third-Party Advertisers Guide. Once on the Municipal World website, you can click on the icon bookshop, and it illustrates a list of books that are related to running for municipal office. They are available to purchase online. And as I mentioned, the Municipal Counselor's Guide is available through the Ministry's Municipal Affairs and Housing website as well. So next slide. This concludes our candidates training session. I know it's a lot of information to take in, and